while we're waiting for our we do have one presenter with us, and while we're waiting for the other presenter, I'll get started. So we can go to the next slide. I'm Professor Andrea Rother. I'm head of the Environmental Health Division at the University of Cape Town in South Africa, and I'm facilitating today's discussion forum. You are all most welcome, and please do continue to introduce yourself in the chat with your name, country, and organization. Do make sure that when you respond to everyone and not just the host and the panelists. I'd also like to let you know that Natasha Lalou is working with me, who's in the background, also from the University of Cape Town as a research coordinator. This discussion forum is supported by funding from Sweden, which comes through the Swedish Chemicals Agency, CHEMI. So the purpose of the University of Cape Town, or UCT's Chemical Discussion Forum, is to give an opportunity to bring representatives together from different regions, sectors, and stakeholder groups, really looking at supporting a consortium of stakeholders to discuss various issues related to chemicals. And as you'll see today, we're going to talk about plastics and chemicals. We're trying to build the capacity of regulators, researchers, and NGOs, particularly in low and middle income countries, and to give an opportunity to discuss emerging issues which regulators might not have otherwise access to. So we achieve this by learning from each other, sharing information and data, identifying gaps, and problem solving collectively to reduce and prevent chemical poisoning and environmental contamination, with a view to a toxic-free future, particularly for the next generation. So this is not really a webinar. We try to foster discussion, and we do this by encouraging you to have questions and comments in the chat. The only people who will actually be speaking will be the presenters and myself. It just gives more space for more people to engage. This is a non-partisan group, which means we may not agree with each other's opinions, but we will respect each other. And we will have polls, as you saw in the one that we had just at the beginning with Mentimeter. We will continue to have poll questions as we move on. Next slide, please. So we have two presenters today, one from the European chemical industry, Ece, who's from Cefic, and Dorothy Otieno, who's from the Center for Environmental Justice and Development in Kenya, an NGO. Do we have Ece with us yet? Dorothy, would you be comfortable starting since we don't have Ece with us yet?
Yes, I can start.
I think we should do that in the interest of time. So if you wouldn't mind just introducing yourself, and then we'll go ahead. So we will be starting with question 2 rather than question 1, for those of you who have downloaded the discussion. And I will hand over to you, Dorothy. You're welcome to turn on your video. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dorothy Otieno. I work at Center for Environment, Justice and Development as a programs officer. I lead the Plastics and Waste Management Program, and I have been here this is my 7th year now, and I'm just really happy to share with you a case study of the chemicals we found in plastics. So that is what my presentation will be all about, chemicals and plastics for sure. So before I get into the context, is just to let you know who CEJAD is. CEJAD is a short form for our organization, Center for Environment, Justice and Development. And we are a public interest NGO that's based in Kenya. And we work on these program areas that are now on your screen, one of it being plastics and waste management. This is where we advocate for POPs, persistent organic pollutants elimination. We also work with waste speakers to make sure that they are organized into associations that can use to champion their rights. And as such, the project or the program or the intervention I'm making today falls within activities within this program. We also have a program on phase out of highly hazardous pesticides. I'll just mention this in passing, just so you know what we do, aside from issues of plastics and waste management. We also are working to eliminate the use of lead in paint. And we also have another program on mercury elimination and implementation of the Minamata Convention. And so we're trying to eliminate the use of mercury in artisanal and small-scale gold mining, from dental amalgam use, and from application for use in cosmetics and lamps and other equipment. Next slide, please. Right. And so as I go into the presentation, we were interested to find out exactly what chemicals are found in plastics that are in the Kenyan market. We know that right now plastics are recycled. Whether it is circular or non-circular, that was a question that we wanted to find out. Yes, we're talking about a circular economy, that we want to recycle, that is a good practice. And we wanted to know, okay, well, is recycling, the current practice of recycling or circular economy, toxic free, or is it full of toxins? So we conducted a project, and the aim of the project was just to reduce or eliminate the production, the trade, the use of non-circular plastics. In this case, non-circular plastics are plastics that do contain chemicals in them. And so what we're trying to say is that this plastic should not be recycled because of the hazardous chemicals. And therefore, it interferes with the integrity of the circular economy that we try to push for. And in order to meet these objectives, we decided to sample toys, and we went into ordinary markets. I know that developing countries have secondhand markets, and these are places where most people are actually able to get items that they can afford. So majority of the people, the middle income earners and the low income earners, who are usually majority of the graph, when you look at the population graph, are in developing countries. So these are areas where we sampled plastic toys. So the toys that we sampled were black plastics, but I'll be able to talk about them later specifically. So we sampled toys, kitchen utensils, cutlery, hair accessories, and office equipment. The other thing we went to sample was we wanted to understand how plastic pollution is impacting the environment. And we all know that when our environment is impacted, then so is our food chain. And so we sampled some eggs in the food in the environment, especially in hotspot areas where we were sampling for where there has been occasions of open burning of plastics, to be able to understand whether the chemicals are finding their way into our food chain. And lastly, we were able to sample and test for hazardous chemicals in clothing. We're talking about waterproof clothes. So we wanted to understand what makes them waterproof and why are they waterproof, and if there are chemicals that support that. Next slide, please. All right, so one of the things that we were able to find, and this is for the plastics that we tested, as I mentioned earlier, we only went for testing of black plastics because we know that our laptops, our phones, most of those items are black in color, and they do contain these chemicals called brominated flame retardants. So there was that anticipation that whereas we are recycling e-waste, that this brominated flame retardant chemicals are finding their way into consumer products. So out of all the plastics that were able to, we sampled more than 96 plastics, and 12 were the ones that were actually subjected to this test after an initial test anyway. So what we're able to find is that we had polybrominated diphenyl ethers ranging between 0.2 to 278 parts per million. So the reason why this was concerning is because PDEs, I'll call them in short, are already listed under the Stockholm Convention for Elimination, and they're not supposed to be found in consumer products. But the items, the toys that we sampled, the ones that you see on the right of the screen, are consumer products, and they did contain this persistent organic chemicals. So what this indicated is that persistent organic chemicals from e-waste are found in consumer products that we use every single day. And as mentioned, some of these were listed for elimination, and it's a concern to see them in our products that we use every day. Next slide, please. All right, so when we look at the findings, this was also very key because when I had to understand the gender aspects of it, isn't it? Like, for example, the red circles are the large ones, and those are the ones that contained high levels of of POPs in them. So these are women products. So then the question that we constantly ask ourselves is, are women in this position of decision making? We're talking about recycling of products. Do women sit in some of those decision making spaces in companies that recycle? And if they do they have access to such information that recycling e-waste and all of this other black equipment could lead to items being contaminated, and mostly for women? So there are questions there. And then when you look at the smaller ones, which is the second leading in terms of the quantities of persistent organic pollutants found in those plastics, we saw that children toys were second after women's products. And so this already means that our children, the young generation, are already exposed to these chemicals just by the fact that they play with toys, and also because of the hand-to-mouth behavior, then they're susceptible to the impacts of these chemicals that are found in plastic. So this also is concerning for women who, their children who are supposed to represent the next generation, and for the children now who are already impacted, getting access to these items which are contaminated. Next slide, please. All right, so remember I mentioned that we did 3 tests. So moving on to egg sampling and testing. And for us to be able to do biomonitoring, we want to understand that, well, those plastics that I explained finally end up as waste. And wherever they end up at, for example, in Kenya, which are mostly dump sites, there's some form of open burning that occurs. It will occur either in the dump site or next to a street, because there's still cases of open burning in most developing countries, and Kenya is one of them. So I wanted to understand whether these chemicals that are found in plastics actually impact the ecosystem, the food chain. And so we sampled eggs from 3 different places. We're sampling them in hotspots, for example, in Dandora, where we're anticipating dioxins and furans from combustion or burning of plastics, and also in a place where there was a lot of e-waste dismantling. And so depending on the sample site, we were able to find dioxins and PCBs, polychlorinated biphenyls. So these are some of the other persistent organic chemicals that are listed under Stockholm Convention for elimination, but we still continue to see them. And so that means that without proper measures of how waste should be managed, then there's a likelihood that there's leakage of these chemicals into the food chain. And the reason we sampled eggs, for example, is because we get access to eggs. Eggs are one of the cheapest sources of proteins. And most people are able to afford eggs, which means that majority of the people, especially those who are eating free-range chicken eggs, could be exposed, especially if they live in the hotspot areas that I mentioned. So in general, we're able to summarize that the current waste management practices, for example, open burning, incineration, do contaminate the food chain with persistent organic pollutants. Next slide, please. All right, and so we also had, we also sampled jackets, raincoats, and it was interesting because we were going for waterproof gloves, jackets, trousers, and we wanted to see, we're anticipating that we'll find PFAS is also a type of persistent organic chemical in those clothes. And yes, indeed, after lab tests, we found that one jacket that we had sampled did contain, according to the EU regulation, had surpassed the EU regulation and contained 25 parts per billion for cumulative sum of PFCs, a type of PFAS, which is also a type of POP. And the most interesting thing is that jackets that were sampled in Kenya had the highest level of extractable organic fluorines. So with all of this information, it becomes concerning, because then we start asking ourselves questions such as, what are these plastics that are coming into the market, whether they are in terms of products or they're in terms of textiles and clothing? What exactly is it that we in developing countries are using? It's important to note that some of these items are actually imported. So, for example, if I went into this, this is a secondhand market that a colleague on mine on the screen and I went. And these are items that we import, for example, from China, from other countries, So what is it exactly that we're allowing in our countries, and what is the chemical constitutes? Do we have ways in which we can check for those chemicals in them? And that continues to be the question that we raise all the time. Next slide, please. So the recommendations that we provided are, for example, that we need to halt the entry of plastics treated with brominated flame retardants for recycling into toys and other consumer goods. So we don't want for there to ever be chemicals that are treated with these persistent organic pollutants to be used or recycled into new products, new consumer good products, because then we want to reduce the exposure to these chemicals, especially for children who are still developing. And then we also propose that we set stricter limits for persistent organic pollutants in waste. For example, the Africa region proposed to have 50 parts per million as a low pop content level, and also 10 parts per million for unintentional trace contaminants level. So it's to make sure that, remember in the earlier slides, we were talking about 275 parts per million. So that is way above what the Africa region is trying to propose. So that means that our products should have very minimal content, if there ever is, of persistent organic pollutants, although the ideal situation would be to not have those chemicals in the plastics. The other one is to restrict brominated flame retardants as a class and to prevent regrettable substitutes. And this, for example, could mean that, we are replacing one flame retardant and introducing another one, which could possibly be more toxic than the one that we are trying to address or prevent or ban, for example. So when we ban this persistent organic pollutants as a class, then it means that we're taking action towards all the other substitutes that could be equally bad or toxic or even worse. So the other item is that now that we're negotiating the plastics treaty, is that it should regulate and control plastic waste, especially the chemical content of plastic materials. And this is key because in that conversation, chemicals and plastics is one of the core obligations that we are trying to make sure that the plastics treaty can be able to address, that we do not want to see the chemicals that have already been noted in plastics in them, because now there are more than 16,000 and only about 3,600 of them have been tested or are known. So the rest are not known. So we should use the precautionary principle, and that we should use non-burn combustion technologies, because when we sampled the eggs, for example, where plastics were burning, then we found that the chicken that were eating around that area were exposed to those dioxins and furans, and hence in their eggs, and we ate them. So we do not advocate for combustion technologies, including incineration. And next slide, please. Right. So what then we're saying in conclusion and in summary is that currently we have seen that plastics do contain hazardous chemicals. And whereas we tested the black chemicals, right now we continue to test the other ones that are not necessarily black to be able to check whether there are these hazardous chemicals that are known in them. And so then it means that recycling currently accumulates toxic materials into new products. So for example, if we are going to make a black toy, then it means that a lot of e-waste from many computers have been recycled together. So it means that there's an accumulation of these persistent organic pollutants into a new product, which is worse than the initial product. So that is what we're calling a toxic circular economy that we are trying to move away from. But even more importantly, is that we're calling for countries and all stakeholders to support the elimination of plastic pollution and to move and to transition to non-chemical alternatives. And there have been some alternatives when we were at the UNEA, for example. There's a lady from Kenya who presented on the alternatives to plastics, that businesses no longer have to use single-use packaging especially for food, because she was providing alternatives and she was using these alternatives from agricultural remains. So I know that there could be questions there, but it's just to show that it is possible for us to adopt safer alternatives that are chemical-free. Next slide, please, if I still have. Okay. So I think that I've come to the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dorothy. It's really always so good to have actually concrete examples. And I know that it's not easy in many of our countries to do that kind of research and to come up with the concrete data that you did. So thank you for that. And thank you also for presenting first when you were planning on to present third. So we're going to start with the third question. And then our first presenter has joined us. Welcome. And so we're going to move to the third question, which is what research activities are ongoing or needed in your country to identify chemicals and plastics? So we're going to have this discussion in the chat now, and then we will also have a couple of poll questions. Dorothy, you're welcome to leave your video on, your mic on, and you can continue responding to the questions. And then Ece, we'll come to you a bit later, but thank you for joining. So please, I invite all of you to move into the chat and to respond to the first question. We'll see you in the chat room. So Dorothy, there's some comments in the chat. I don't know if you want to respond to those. One of the comments was about the contamination of eggs as an indicator.
Okay. Okay, thank you for the presentation. Very interesting to use eggs, yes, as a contamination indicator, yes. And the reason why, we use eggs is because, I mean, it's affordable. Most people are able to afford eggs, and therefore we know that those, and interestingly is that, here in Kenya, for example, people prefer the chicken that are not kept open range. For example, those ones that walk around and eat from anywhere, those ones are the ones that most people prefer, but those are the ones that we're worried about, because if they go and eat from the dump site, then it accumulates in their systems, and then it forms part of the eggs, and then now we consume them, and that's very dangerous. So yes, it was very interesting that we went that way. Okay, I see that there's another question that analysis was prohibited. Dorothy, did you find it easy to find funding for your research? Well, okay, so our research was funded by the Basel Plastics Partnership, and it was not necessarily easy, but because initially we were supposed to start in 2021, but we ended up starting in 2022. So yes, it could be challenging to get funding for the research, but we still pushed on, because, and then now after that, interestingly is that when people have at least seen the results of this, then it becomes easy to seek extra funding, because now we have another funding to support us to sample different kind of chemicals in the same plastics and also in the environment through sampling eggs. So we're testing for a different set of chemicals. So initially it could be challenging, but over time, when at least there are some results, it becomes encouraging even to the funders. Okay, I see another question. In Guyana, would need more research locally to be able to identify chemicals in plastics. And from her knowledge or his knowledge, I'm not aware of any research done locally for this. So the regulatory bodies mostly depend on developed countries' research, yes, and the guidance of international convention, which deals with the chemicals in plastic. That's true. You know, for example, in Kenya, so this is a project that has been done by us, civil society, and Kenya itself as government has not been able to secure funding or to be able to test for these chemicals. And so they depend on such research that we do to share with them these findings. So it can be challenging for countries. I think for Kenya, one of the things that came up when we spoke with the regulatory authorities was we do not have capacity to test for these plastics. And if we're saying that a plastic contains more than 16,000 chemicals in them, how are we going to test for all of these 16,000 chemicals? So it becomes an issue of capacity and also equipment. What equipment are we supposed to use? Can we learn how to use those equipment? All of this become a challenge. And it's true that we depended so much on developed countries' research, but it becomes very useful to have your own research locally, because then you're able to advocate. So when we go to, for example, attend the Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm Convention, we are able to show, and even the Plastics Treaty, we're able to show that we are calling for reduction, for example, because whatever is coming into our country is full of chemicals, and we have proof of that, or proof for that. So it becomes really helpful. And I do agree with you. It can be, you need local research. I see Robert is saying, thank you for an exciting presentation. In Zimbabwe, we need a baseline survey to determine the current production level of plastic. There's a booming industry on plastic production, especially for household products. Should we get worried? You know, the thing is, it will be good to know, especially from the perspective of chemicals, what are these countries, this industry, what chemicals are they using to make those plastics? So that even when we're complaining that in our case, the plastics that we're testing were imported and they do contain chemicals, what about the ones that we are generating locally? And it's also good to know, you know, because sometimes it's good to know how much Africa is producing. And in terms of production, if I may ask, is it production in the sense that you are importing the raw materials and producing a product, or is it that there's some mining of oil and gas and then there's, you know, all of that? But I think we depend so much on raw materials from different countries, but if you're mining, then it becomes, we need to talk about production for sure. Okay, Colin says, couple of studies and tests, some linked to EPR. Yes, building cars, yes. To identify chemicals of concern and improve treatment, a strong focus on PFAS lately. Yes, there has been. Yes, I do agree with you that right now there's a strong focus on PFAS, and including our government. One of the items or the things that the government told us when we're doing this research is that there is a gap in terms of data for PFAS in Kenya, and that this is an area that they are very interested to check, yes, because it could be in the cars that are being shipped into developing countries, and the plastics in the building, for example. And so they're even looking at procurement, that they should have a standard for procurement, that these plastics that do contain these chemicals should not be procured for use by government. And I think that, yes, a lot of attention is slowly moving to PFAS, for sure.
Just to say, we have posted another poll in the interest of time. So it will be, thank you, with some responses coming through. So what are some of the hazardous chemicals found in recycled products in your country? Dorothy, I think there were two questions. Let's see if I can find. So Anthony asked, is polyethylene plastics harmful to the reproductive system?
Polyethylene is PE. So for example, right now, because we have not tested PE, but what we have tested, for example, are plastics that are used in, which most of the time are usually HDPE, high density plastic. So, but then there's still concern there, right? Like for as long as plastics are 16%, I mean, are 1% chemicals, and more than 16,000 chemicals are used to manufacture plastics, it's a cause for us to worry. And then that is why we constantly need to find out what chemicals are in this plastic. So I could say that if we're going to use the precautionary approach, then it's very useful, because right now we can't say for sure until we have tested. And yeah, that's why we have to be really cautious. So, but I know that other plastic, for example, that do contain this hazardous chemicals have neurotoxic effects. For example, they could be cancerous, especially the ones that are listed for elimination. There's proof that they could cause cancer. They cause endocrine disruption. So we see a lot of diabetes now, and also issues of reproduction. So where there is confirmed case, for example, the one that we know for sure is the one we're talking about, right? The ones with chemicals that are eliminated, those ones are very risky for human health and the environment.
So I wondered, Dorothy, if you want to respond just to the previous slide, the previous poll. We are going to conclude shortly, but I don't know if you want to, Natasha, can you make it a bit smaller so we can read it? It's a bit skewed. Natasha, are you able to make it a bit smaller? Natasha, can you make it a bit smaller? I can't read the top. I don't know, Dorothy, can you read the top? I can't read the top. I think it says, are chemicals in plastic products tested in your country? So we have 4 no's, 3 yeses. It'd be interesting to know which countries are actually testing. Maybe you can put that in the chat. So there's a question, do you have any standards for these chemicals in Kenya, the ones that you tested and did research on?
No, so that's a great question. We do not have the standards yet. And it is when we presented this research that our Kenya Bureau of Standards decided that we need to regulate the chemicals in plastic. So I think that that's an action that has been triggered because of the findings of this research. Because other than that, it will also be very difficult for the Kenya Bureau of Standards in Kenya we know it will be, our governments have always insisted that they want research to be able to justify their actions. And so this is how we became happy to provide this, because then they don't have any excuse at the moment than to develop these standards, because now we have shown them proof that this is an issue that's affecting Kenya. So currently, no, we don't have standards, but that's the way that we are going. It's going to start this year, actually, the development of those standards.
Thank you very much. So, Natasha, I don't know if you can move on to the next slide. We now run out of time, so there were only 2 responses to that one. So we're going to go back to question 1 now. But just to say, Dorothy, thank you very much. As I said, it's really important to have a case study. It's, countries need to be motivated and really to start understanding what to be looking for, and that you can do research in our countries. So thank you for that. There are a few more questions and comments, but you're welcome to continue responding to them in the chat. And if we have time later, we'll come back to you. Thank you. Ece, I'm going to ask you to, see you, maybe you just want to move your screen a little bit so we can see you. And welcome. There you are. Welcome very much. Sorry about the time. I'm sure the time zone threw you. And so welcome, and I welcome you to introduce yourself and go ahead and take us through question 1.
Thank you. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation. I'm honored to be here and to give this presentation and contribute. I'm Ece Koc Martin, and I'm working as a product stewardship manager in Cefic, European Chemical Industry Council. And I have a PhD in polymer science, and for several years I worked in industry as a polymer scientist and also a REACH coordinator. And now, since the beginning of September, I am in Cefic in the product stewardship team. So this is my background. So actually I'm a scientist, but also quite related with the regulations. So thank you. And next slide, please. Okay, now I would like to start with the description of the project that is initiated by the International Council of Chemical Association. And as you know, plastics became ubiquitous in modern life because they are lightweight, versatile materials. However, with increasing production and consumptions of plastics, our world experiences increasing releases of plastics to the environment, and also it contributes to the pollution. And all plastics are made of chemicals, including basic polymers and solvents and additives such as plasticizers, flame retardants, heat, UV stabilizers, lubricants, and pigments. And these additives are used to deliver the material's functionality. And while the adverse physical impacts of plastics in the environment are often visible, less apparent are the health risks associated with the chemicals used to produce or found in plastics, and of course subsequently released into the environment. And here, in this whole scheme, additives have a crucial meaning. So their technical function characterizes what the substance or mixtures is intended to do and may trigger some exposure consideration. And the additives, some of them become part of the polymer matrix, such as cross-linkers or curing agents, or some of the additives just stay as free as reaction product in the polymer matrix. And besides all these technical function, information on chemicals in plastics is rarely transmitted along the plastics life cycle, and is therefore could be unavailable to regulatory authorities, consumers, and waste managers. And of course, this has a consequence. This lack of information could hamper risk assessments and as well as the product safety. And of course, it also further might complicate the recycling of plastic waste because some additives can negatively impact the recycling processes, which have been already mentioned also in the previous presentation of Dorothy. And lately, United Nations Environmental Program identified over 13,000 chemicals associated with plastics and plastics manufacturing across a wide range of applications such as packaging, consumer and institutional products, or automotive sector, transportation, and more. And list of these 13,000 plastics are also associated together with their information on their functions, compatible polymer type, typical industrial sectors where they are used, their hazardous classification, as well as their regulatory status. And of which more than 3,200 plastic monomers, additives, non-intentional added substances have been identified as chemicals of concern, of potential concern based on their hazardous properties. And ICCA, the International Council of Chemical Association, has developed a complementary initiative to UNEP database. This is a global database. And this database, or this project, that is on plastic additive database and its risk assessment framework, with the objective to increase the transparency regarding to additive use and support chemical management capacity building in different economies, and advocate and provide the tools to regulators to facilitate risk-based regulations instead of hazard-based lists. So basically, this database has been created to identify the current number and identify the additives in commerce for the last 10 years. And there are also generic uses and applications are implemented. as well as existing and publicly available health and safety and regulatory information that can aid in the risk assessment framework. So, here the goal is to have more accurate database, and our approach is the ICCA approach is a little bit different than the UNOP approach. The sources are different, the authorial sources are different. So, as I said, this is an initiative which is a complementary work to UNEP database. And yes, we could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. Chemicals currently in commerce are defined as chemicals used in the past 10 years and that are aligned with the authoritative definition. And the claim of UNEP, 13 chemicals currently are used in plastics, and over 3,000 of additives identified are substances of concern. However, we would like to improve on it with different sources. So please, next slide. Next slide, please. Yes. And also, there is a difference between a chemical data that has no hazard data and one that has sufficient data to determine it's not hazardous. So based on the current available regulatory data, we have an impression that hundreds of chemicals exist and are on the market with no hazard information. So we target to have a more accurate database that go more into the details. And chemical additives are not just used in plastic, as they are used in a variety of other products, applications, and they are regulated comprehensively. So basing on these backgrounds, I think we could jump to the question. Next slide. Yes. And this figure on this slide represents the approach for the assessment and prioritization of the plastic additives. So here, what I would like to summarize is that with this new global database that we are building on, hazard-based approaches don't include an assessment of exposure. However, we would like to add a risk-based approach, and we believe that the added value of risk-based approach is that it will specifically consider and quantify the migration of the chemical that might result in unintended exposure to humans and environment. And basically, where there is an additive with a known hazard, can be shown to have a negligible potential to migrate from the plastic due to the covalently banded structure, but also there will be negligible exposure and negligible risk. So how we are planning to set up such a risk assessment? First, we will figure out if the additive has a confirmed hazard classification of properties of concern. If yes, they will be prioritized in the risk assessment. But if they don't have a confirmed hazard classification or properties of concern, so we will check whether this additive has a negligible migration from the matrix basing on their covalent bistructure or some log QOV values. Basically, it's like we are checking out its diffusion within the polymer. And if yes, we will do further assessment, and this is under progress. And we believe that this is also an important step in the risk assessment. I just would like to support this with an example. Let's say we have an antioxidant using in the packaging industry. But as you might know, when we introduce this antioxidant, and in 5 seconds, the antioxidant will be oxidized even before the polymerization starts. It means that it might have some degradation or transformation products associated with this additive oxidation process. So here it might be necessary to have also to put a deep consideration or studies on this perspective, and this is at the moment what it's worked on. And for example, recently there was also a study from one of the industry where they made a deep investigation of the antioxidant oxidation, and they found out that there were 10 associated degraded antioxidants. Particularly from this one antioxidant. So they had to synthesize all these degraded products. They had to send it to different laboratories, and they had to make a true analysis. And of course, it has to be also tested about on their toxicological performances. So, of course, if the degraded and the transformation products have some hazard analysis, it will also be in need to prioritize. If not, we could simply deprioritize this additive as well. So basically, with this risk assessment approach, this risk assessment approach enable both the characterization and the quantification of both hazard and exposure thresholds that can be more robustly and clearly utilized to support both communication and decision-making elements of the potential risks that might be associated with the use of any chemical added to the plastic article. So it's all about the quantification of the migration of the chemical that might result in unintended exposure to the humans and the environments. So this is where also the ICCA global database associated with such a risk assessment framework would be a very nice regulatory story and nice database. And also it will, the target is that it will cover most of the additives in the commerce. So next slide, please. So I think all this background that I presented, it would lead us to the question 1. So how is the industry addressing transparency in your country in relation to disclosing hazard-relative additives used in plastics?
Thank you very much, Ece, for all the information that you gave us and what the industry is proposing and working on. So there are a couple of questions already in the chat. I encourage people to continue responding to the question that is on the screen. We'll have a few polls shortly. So Hans asks, can we find toxic additives in food or beverages? So can the research or the system that's being proposed identify toxic additives in food and beverages? That's the question.
I mean, it depends on also the how they are processed, and I mean the target is no, but yes, of course there is a possibility.
Then there's a question from me. Will the screening framework the industry is suggesting be feasible in low and middle income countries?
Yes.
And maybe you could just speak to that. How will it be feasible?
Well, I mean, even though there is no regulatory framework in the countries, of course, within this global database, the target is to reach them. So even though there is no regulatory regulatory framework, everybody should be capable of entering and checking out in this global base and reach the information they would like to receive. So this is the goal also. I hope I was clear.
Yeah, no, you were very clear. Thanks. So the second part, yeah, so it's more going to be globally populated, and then it be accessible to low and middle income countries is the way I hear it.
Yes, this is the target. This is the global additive database. So every country from different economies should be able to have an access.
And then the second part of the question was, will it be a faster process than what the UNEP is proposing in order to protect human health quickly? I mean, that's really the goal, isn't it? So will what the industry is proposing be a quicker method?
And this is a complementary work. of UNEP, to the UNEP, and of course we are examining the alignments, but the approaches are different, the resources are different. Maybe the ICCA is using more authoritative sources as well. So it's a complementary work, complementary initiative with the use of different resources. And also the target is also to investigate all the additives in commerce during the last 10 years.
So presumably it could be faster or not necessarily?
It could be. It could be.
Okay. There's another question from Babajide, who says, can you respond to the question on using plastic containers to pack hot food? Is it a safe practice? Sorry, we missed that question.
Yes, can you respond to the question? Plastic containers to pack hot food. Is it a safe practice? Yeah, it depends the plastic that is used. If we choose the plastic that is used correctly, yes, it could be a safe practice. But of course, the pack food, all the degradation process and the migration from the plastic containers, depending on the conditions of the hot food, they should be into consideration. But yes, I mean, the target is to make it as safe as possible. So I would say yes. Has no regulatory consequence. That says no regulatory consequence. Chemicals are from spaces, cross actions when dealing plastics.
So there's also a poll that people can respond to while Ece, you can carry on. So people have been responding to the first question, indicating what kind of regulation or lack of regulation they have.
I mean, if there is a lack of regulation and this global database that has been initiated as a complementary work of UNEP by ECCA, this is the target. So everybody should be able to have an access to use and get the information necessary from the global database. So even though there is no regulatory body, it should serve for the purpose. Uganda, our national standard. Yes, also in Uganda, our national standard prescribed temperature limits for food grade plastics packaging. Yes, if already there is a prescription of the temperature limits, yes, it could be conceived as a safe use. So if it's correctly labeled, yes, it's better, no?
So is there a move? I'm looking at the last question from comment from Alpha, you know, that ingredients aren't listed on the packaging, that there's no legal requirement to do so. Is there a move by the industry to put anything on packaging in relation to the additives and the ingredients in the plastics? How is the industry sort of promoting traceability of what's in the products?
I mean, we are working on it currently. I mean, plastics many times. It's I think with the chemical management capacity building methods, yes, this could be helps.
Do you want to comment on the poll before we move on to the next one?
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, the poll, yes, yeah. Right.
Oops. Natasha, can you go back to the poll? Thank you. It was too
So,
quick.
as a, like generally, so there are regulations in your country that require us to deal with hazard related use. Yes, 6 states no. So basic, there are no regulations. So this is a point where we should put more consideration on it. And don't know, yeah. So I think the answer is clear here, no?
Mm,
Mhm.
indeed, yeah.
Yeah.
Now we can move on to the next poll. We have a few more minutes. So provide examples of regulations in your countries or the barriers to why there are no regulations. Include your country in your response. So maybe if there are any regulations that you've referred to in the previous question, previous poll, you could indicate what those are. And if you don't have regulations, what are the barriers? So the link is in the chat. You can just click on that and respond to it. You can continue to post in the chat if you have any more comments in relation to question number 1. So there was a comment earlier on from Mistral where she was saying there's no evidence that companies in South Africa, for example, must disclose any potentially hazardous additives in plastic. Is this a practice in other countries that it's being required more to disclose what the hazards are? Is this something that the industry is having to comply with more in higher income countries?
Yeah, I mean, it's working on it, yes.
Okay, do you want to respond at all to the poll, the comments that have been posted in the poll? There's not much there at the moment.
Yeah. Mhm.
You don't have any comments on that, then we'll go ahead and move on.
Yeah, so
Go ahead.
yeah, I mean, the chemical network, and yeah, we also enable capacity building towards the sound management of chemicals. So there are also projects on it. Research and testing facility. Mhm.
Yeah, so there's a few coming through in terms of what's happening in other countries.
Yes. So, in some countries, there is no regulation. And some of them, like Madagascar, there is a regulation, but no application. So, capacity building projects could be a way to move further in this sense. Importation, commercialization, and distribution of non-biodegradable plastic and packages.
Yeah, it'd be interesting if this Burkina Faso law is also relevant for example, like containers that chemicals are actually coming in.
Focus what present in plastics, yes. Yeah, in Lesotho, the most prominent barrier is the lack of regulatory framework. Yeah. Additionally, there are no research centers that could focus on chemicals.
And then Nigeria has posted in the chat that they're presently, through its national regulatory agency, formulating regulations on plastics to include regulating standards for chemicals and plastics. I think the new treaty is also going to make countries, those who are signatories, to respond a lot more. Guinea-Bissau has no regulation.
Guinea-Bissau, no regulation. And Nigeria is presently told its national regulatory agency formulating its regulations on plastics to include regulating on standards for chemicals in plastics. So there is work done on the topic.
Yeah, and it seems there's a mix from what's in the poll, that some have regulations, some don't, and many that do have regulations, there isn't enforcement of it, which is a comment that Madagascar and Gabon made. Thanks, everyone. That's most helpful to have those responses. Shall we move on to question 2 then?
Yes, please.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think we have already, and in the poll questions, the topic has been already highlighted. So some countries, as it has been mentioned, have regulatory framework, but some don't have. And the ones, some of them have regulatory framework, but not application. And as an ICC, the global chemical industry devotes significant resources to build capacity worldwide in support of developing, implementing, and improving effective chemical management programs in different regions. So this is a work progress, but if you would like to have more detailed information, you could contact with our Cefic colleagues, with Maria. I think she's also on the call, and Crisante. So this is what I would like to highlight here within this slide. Maria, are you on the call?
Maria, if you want to say something, let us know and we'll unlock the mic for you. Natasha, do you want to allow Maria to, okay, and now please go ahead, Maria, and hi, nice to see you.
Yeah, hi everyone. No, I just wanted to say that indeed one of our main targets after the discussions on the new global framework on chemicals is to really help developing countries or countries that don't have a proper chemicals management system. And it's one of our ambitions that we get at least 30 countries rolled and working on the management of chemicals. We are not focusing specifically on additives because we think there is really a lot to do everywhere. So in the additives part, which I think has started very recently, even in Europe, we're starting with this database, trying to get as much information as we can on the database, so at least countries can get in and see, what is going on and which substances they need to really manage and regulate.
Thank you. Thanks. So I believe there is a question. So that maybe if we move on to the next slide. I think the next slide is just the question. There we go. So for countries without domestic chemical management systems, how can industry develop and implement plastics chemical management programs? So Maria just mentioned that there is this initiative and effort to help countries. So maybe for those of you who, like Lesotho, have no systems at all, or South Africa. And for countries with a management system, what improvements are needed and why? So for example, how can enforcement be assisted? If you could respond in the chat, and I suggest we also move on to the next poll. If Dorothy, you are also welcome to come in if you want. I am going to allow if a couple of people would like to speak, I will allow for that. I did see Prudence, you had your hand up at one stage because we have a bit of time. So if you do want to speak, you can raise your hand and we'll give you the mic. Oops, sorry, not me. So there's quite a long input from Guyana. It says perhaps the regulatory body in Guyana can also work closely with the Standards Authority to have importers submit a breakdown of the properties of the plastic they want to import. Ibukun, you say countries without a system should put some in place. That's a very wishful thought. I know Lesotho has been trying for years and years, but the problem is how to do it. And so the question, I guess, is there a role for industry to play in assisting? And it would be good to hear from what the participants think. Monica has her hand up. Natasha, could you give her the ability to speak, please? I don't think you have to make them a presenter. You can just actually give her the mic, allow her to talk.
Okay, thank you very much. Good afternoon.
Just introduce yourself.
I wanted to speak to that. Yes, my name is Monica. I work with Uganda. I work in Uganda as a
Sorry, we can't hear you, Monica. You've disappeared. You are in the distance. Monica, we can't hear you properly. You're in the distance. Monica? Monica, we can't hear you. Monica? Can anyone hear Monica?
But now when we go into the specific aspects like plastic, yes, we can handle broad areas of chemicals, but now other growing areas are coming up, like plastic is an area of concern, which initially was a source of. So that is why you realize as new areas come up, capacities are still lacking and wanting. Like for instance, we've had the National Environment Act by the state, but it is not so explicit in terms of addressing chemicals and plastics. So that means therefore, as we work on the EPR regulations with regards to plastics, maybe that's where now the aspect of chemicals and plastics can come in, or the chemical regulation, which is going on.
Thank you for your input, Monica. It's been very difficult to hear you. so you may want to post some of your comments, but it's been quite difficult to hear you. So there are a couple of comments coming through on the screen, if you'd like to respond to those, Ece.
Yeah. For countries without system, we should put some in place, and consumer associations. If my submission was received. Yeah, what I see here is that already some countries has received some support from INAP for the development of a legal framework for chemicals. But what is expected from industry is that industry has known to have more expertise and funding. So what is expected is to create such a science industry policy framework to help for the purpose. This is my understanding from this poll answers. Am I correct? Consumer associations driving. Yes, some initiatives, some voluntary initiatives are also welcomed. And industry can contribute to financing prevention and remediation of harmful effects brought by their plastics chemical additives throughout their life cycle.
So there's a question from Dorothy.
Yes, for transparency, would the industry be able to disclose all the chemicals that are used to make plastics to support informed decision making? And this is the goal. What is the ambition? Transparency.
You know, we've been talking about transparency for quite a long time. I'm wondering if, you know, what are the kind of major stumbling blocks for us to be moving forward a bit faster? I mean, as I said before, the key really is to protect human health. And if we don't know what's in a product from a health professional's perspective, it's very difficult then to be able to treat patients, etc. So what are the efforts to maybe do things a bit more quickly?
Well, I mean, besides in the risk assessment framework could be help for the purpose. So as I mentioned, some of the chemicals have been identified non-hazardous. Some of them don't have hazardous or information about their hazardous status, and some of them indicated non-hazardous. And this is a point where at the moment with this database we are focusing on to get the detailed information on them with different resources. And in the risk assessment picture I have shared during the presentation, it's basically based on prioritization of the chemicals. So if they are indicated to be non-hazardous, is okay, we could deprioritize. But if they're indicated to be non-hazardous, doesn't mean that they won't migrate. So it's a point where we should make some investigation and research on the topic. So I hope I'm clear, but basically what I'm trying to say is that where an additive with a known hazard can be shown to have a negligible potential to migrate from the plastic, there will be negligible exposure and risk. And this is the critical point where we could make research on it.
Would it make it faster if a hazard-based approach was used for the most hazardous additives rather than trying to include a risk assessment as well.
Maybe, but on the other hand, the hazard-based approaches don't include an assessment of exposure. So here the added value of the risk assessment approach is that it will specifically consider and quantify the migration of the chemical that might result in unintended exposure to human and the environment. This is the value of the risk-based approach. So this is a little bit different than the hazard-based approach.
Yeah, my concern from a public health perspective is the time.
Yeah.
The longer we take, the more people are exposed, the more short and long-term health effects. So I think, not only looking for improving regulations and having regulations, but doing things much faster is really important.
Yes, I agree. Thank you. Yeah, it's true.
So there's a few more. Jamaica and Lesotho, I think, have posted a few comments in the poll. And thank you for those of you who are taking the time to put in some information.
So does your exposure scenario consider burning of plastic waste? It's currently under progression and burning of plastic waste.
It's a very important point because in many countries, that's what's done with, particularly with pesticide containers, for example, that they're burnt. So thanks, Leonard, for that.
Yeah, it's a very good question. And surely GB uses plastics and import plastics. Mm-hmm.
So we're on to the final poll for today. So who should finance plastic chemical additive management systems in your country? So we talk a lot about needing regulations, we talk about having transparency and access to information, but who should finance these systems?
Mm-hmm. So for industry to put in place there is. Are there regulation requesting information about the chemicals in the plastics that are imported?
Sorry, that's a question for Isabel, but you're welcome to answer it. So we're still waiting for people to respond to who should finance. We have had a couple of comments in the chat, but not yet in the Menti. Well, there's some comments now.
Burning of plastic waste. who should finance industry as part of their CSR.
So corporate social responsibility, perhaps you could speak to that, Ece, if you can. What is the sort of opinion in terms of not international financing, so not having a kind of external financing, but creating financing schemes within countries. So if an industry is operating in any one of these countries that are participating today, shouldn't there be some mechanism for assisting with financing the regulations, financing these transparency systems? What are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts, from my perspective, yes, why not? The industry could take part in it.
And what would be the most effective way for industry to take part?
In collaboration with governments, authorities. I mean, if we can manage to set up a framework to initiate, to set up such a system. But I think every partner governments, industry, if everybody take their responsibility to set up such a system, it would be very efficient, in my opinion.
Okay. There are a few comments in the poll if you want to have a look at that.
Jamaica, plastic producers should do comprehensive fiances. Ethiopia, the government, the industry and the government. The government in collaboration with manufacturers. Yeah. So most of the countries indicates that it would be best the industry and the government collaborates effectively.
Dorothy, is there any scheme in Kenya at the moment in terms of financing systems in Kenya?
Right. So, now what happened for Kenya is that our governments over time saw that they are unable to, for example, manage plastics because of these issues of hazardous chemicals found in them. And so they developed the extended producer responsibility and shift that responsibility exclusively to private sector. Because as they put products in the market, then they have to make sure that those products are safe and not contaminating of chemicals, and that they can get back into the system and that they cannot end up as waste. And so it covers design as well. And so this is the system that our government is currently adopting for management.
Thank you for that. Ibukun, we'll give you the mic if you like.
So in Nigeria, we have a similar arrangement. We have an EPR arrangement that has been set up for the food and packaging industry. And the EPR program is being implemented, but it has not gotten to the point where they're looking at all the chemical additives appropriately. So it's not very clear that those chemicals are being managed at this point in time. I think the focus has been on reducing the plastic that is passed into the environment for so long. But there needs to now be some form of moving to the next level to look at the chemical additives and how that can be improved. Well, most of the time, we can see that a lot of international support comes to the country. For instance, the Basel Center in Nigeria has been working on projects to look at chemical additives. They got the GEF funding to look at chemical additives, especially in electronic waste and all that kind of products, plastics, so that they can manage construction, transportation, and some other form of plastics in pesticides locally here in Nigeria.
Thank you, Ibukun, for that input. And I think that's a very good point that was made. You know, the extended producer responsibility is looking more at the waste and the product, but not the additives and the chemicals that are in it. Ece, are you aware of any extended producer responsibility programs that actually look at the chemicals within the products or within the plastic?
There are some initiations, but I don't know the details, but they started recently, I mean, a few months ago maybe, but I'm not really into that at the moment. Maybe in short, I mean, in a few weeks, I could enlighten you with this question.
That would be useful. So we produce a digest at the end of this discussion where we summarize some of the key points that presenters and the participants made. So if you'd like to add that information to the digest, we will be sending you the draft. That would be great. Thank you very much. Yeah. So we are coming quite quickly to an end. Ece or Dorothy, are there any last comments either of you would like to make as a conclusion?
From my side, it was very interesting and very informative chemical discussion, and I got the chance to get to know you. This is very precious from my side, and to see all the problems you are having. And if we could contribute, it would be amazing. This is all I could say, and I hope that I also managed to give the messages from my presentation to you clearly. You managed to have some takeaways from that. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for that, Ece, and for taking the time. Dorothy?
All right, thank you so much. Thank you, the participants, for engaging with me during this time. And I think that what I see clearly that there is a gap there in terms of developing countries specifically having access to information. But I think that we should continue to, so I know it's not easy, but to continue to source for funding to be able to avail this local data, because then we can be able it can be able to support local legislation development, because most of them are actually missing. But then aside from that, is just to urge you to continue to call for a reduction in plastic production and even the elimination of chemicals in plastics, because first of all, we need to reduce, and then we don't need the chemicals in them. So that will be the end of it. Thank you so much for chatting with me also.
Thank you, Dorothy, and thank you for that very important concluding point. And also thank you for the time that you took. We have put in the chat some of the materials that you shared with us, and thank you for that. I do need to apologize for the strobe light effect in the background. I haven't been able to get to the curtains that are blowing in the sun. So my apologies for that. Just to let you know that the Division of Environmental Health has recently launched a new website. We'll put the link in the chat now, and it is highlighting our projects. So if you would like to find out what discussions we've had previously on the Chemicals Network, you can download the recordings. You can also have the digest that we referred to. We also have a pesticide network, so you can go and look at some of the past topics that we've discussed and listen to the discussions. And we also have materials that we've developed over the years, and you can go in and download posters and policy briefs and some of the alternatives that we've developed. We've even got one on sustainable financing of chemicals and waste, so please have a look at that as well. We also highlight the activities of the Southern African Pesticide Regulators Forum. So please do take a moment to have a look at our new website and also continue to have a look at it. And just to let you know that our next discussion will be on the 23rd of May. We'll be looking at mercury and skin lightening products, as I had mentioned before, is quite a big problem in African countries. So again, thank you to our presenters. Thank you to Natasha, Lalu, and Jen that were in the background. and Caitlin, who were providing technical support. And thank you to all of you who have participated very actively. We always appreciate that. So we'll see you next time on the 23rd of May. And thanks again. Have a lovely day wherever you are. Bye for now.